The world was underwater, and Mateo was sinking with it. 10 years old, small for his age, he clutched a cracked ukulele to his chest, its strings muted by the damp air. The coastal town, once alive with his parents' laughter, now lay gutted. Houses slumped like broken promises, their windows dark, their roofs torn open to a gray, restless sky. Salt and rot clung to his throat, the hurricane's breath still lingering in the puddles that swallowed his sneakers. He walked alone, his shadow thin and wavering, until a sharp bark sliced through the silence. It came from the end of the street, where a mailbox tilted in the flood, half submerged. There, tied to its rusted post, a German shepherd trembled, her fur matted, her eyes fixed on the water as if it might rise again. Mateo froze, the ukulele digging into his ribs. The German shepherd's ribs pressed against her soaked fur, each breath a shallow shudder. Her collar, frayed and caked with mud, hung loose, a faded tag glinting faintly. Scars crisscrossed her muzzle, white lines against black fur, like cracks in a shattered mirror. The water lapped at her paws, and she didn't move, as if surrender was all she had left. Mateo took a step closer, his sneakers squelching. He hummed a soft, broken tune, his mother's old lullaby, and the dog's ears twitched, a flicker of life in her sunken eyes. The flooded street stretched around them, a graveyard of splintered wood and twisted metal, reflecting their shared desolation. Something stirred in Mateo, a pull as deep as the tide. Mateo knelt beside the German shepherd, his knees sinking into the cold mud. The ukulele slipped from his hands, landing with a dull splash. His chest tightened, as if the hurricane had stolen the air from his lungs too. He saw his parents' faces in the ripples, his mother's smile as she sang, his father's hands strumming chords that filled their home. Now gone, swallowed by the storm. His humming faltered, a cracked note escaping his lips, and he pressed his palms to his eyes, willing the memories away. The dog whined, low and sharp, her head tilting toward him. That sound, fragile but real, anchored him to the moment. He wasn't alone, not yet. The water lapped at his shins, and he stayed, trembling, unable to scream, unable to leave. The dog's eyes, amber and clouded, met Mateo's as he fumbled with the knot tying her to the mailbox. His fingers, numb from the cold, slipped on the wet rope, but her gaze held him steady, unblinking, like a lighthouse in the fog. A distant siren wailed, cutting through the drizzle, and Mateo's head snapped up. Shadows moved at the edge of the street, survivors, looters, or something worse he couldn't tell. The dog's ears flicked, her body tensing, but she didn't pull away. He freed the rope, and she stood shaking, her paws sinking into the mud. "We're not done yet," Mateo whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. The words felt like a vow, fragile but binding, as if the storm itself was listening. Mateo's world once sang with light. Before the hurricane, he'd sit between his parents on their porch, the ukulele alive under his father's fingers, his mother's voice weaving melodies that danced with the sea breeze. Mateo, only 8 then, would join in, his high notes climbing like gulls over the waves. Now, in the dim room of his aunt's crowded house, the memory stung like salt in a wound. The ukulele lay untouched in his lap, its strings dull, his voice locked in his throat since the storm took them. He was 10 now, but felt older, hollowed out. Siren's whine from the corner stirred him. Her amber eyes caught the moonlight, echoing his parents' warmth. He hummed a single note, faint and trembling, and felt the ache of a song he couldn't yet sing. Mateo's days blurred into gray. He shuffled to the relief center's makeshift school, his sneakers dragging through muddied streets, avoiding his aunt's soft, pitying glances. The town was a skeleton, shattered windows, uprooted trees, and boats stranded like beached whales. He ate silently, slept silently, his ukulele a weight he carried but never played. Siren followed at a distance, her paws silent on the cracked pavement, her eyes scanning the ruins. Mateo noticed how she avoided loud voices, how her ears flattened at sudden noises. His own heart mirrored her flinch, both of them dodging the world's sharp edges. When he sat on a broken bench, staring at the flooded horizon, Siren settled nearby, not close but not far. Her presence cracked the numbness, a faint pulse in his silent routine. Siren wasn't always a shadow. Before the hurricane, she was a search and rescue K9, her handler Elena, a steady hand in chaos. They'd worked disasters together, Siren's nose cutting through ash and rubble, her ears tuned to a specific melody Elena hummed, a lilting tune that meant find them, save them. The hurricane changed everything. Elena tied Siren to the mailbox as the flood rose, promising to return, but the water took her instead. Siren waited, battered by debris, her fur matted with blood and mud, her trust fraying with each hour. Scars now laced her flank, her muzzle, her spirit. When Mateo's humming echoed that old melody, her head lifted, instincts flickering like a half-remembered song. She watched him, wary, her amber eyes searching for Elena in his small, trembling frame. In the dim shelter of an abandoned shop, Mateo and Siren sat, separated by a cracked tile floor. The air smelled of damp wood and mildew, the walls groaning under the weight of the storm's memory. Mateo traced the ukulele's chipped edge, his fingers hesitant, while Siren curled in a corner, her body tense, eyes tracking his every move. He hummed softly, the notes faltering but familiar, and Siren's ears twitched, her head inching closer. Their pain mirrored in the silence, his grief a locked door, her trust a broken chain. When he paused, she whined, low and plaintive, and he met her gaze. Neither moved closer, but the space between them felt less vast, like the tide pulling back to reveal something solid beneath. The floodwater churned, black and restless, as Siren tugged Mateo down a shattered street. Her nose skimmed the surface, ears pinned, a low growl rumbling in her throat. Debris, splintered boards, a child's shoe, swirled in the current, catching the dim light of a bruised sky. Mateo's heart thudded, his sneakers slipping on the slick pavement. Then, a faint cry, thin as a reed, pierced the air from a half-submerged house. Siren's head snapped toward it, her body rigid, urging him forward. The water lapped at his knees, cold as grief, and his breath caught, the ukulele strapped to his back, a heavy anchor. Siren's amber eyes locked on the house, unwavering, her urgency a silent command. Mateo swallowed, the cry echoing in his chest, pulling him toward the unknown. Mateo stood frozen, the floodwater clawing at his shins. The cry from the house lingered, faint but desperate, and his mind screamed to run. Back to his aunt, back to safety. The water had taken his parents. It could take him too. His hands shook, the memory of their voices drowning in the storm's roar. Siren pressed against his leg, her wet fur grounding him, her eyes fixed on the house. She didn't flinch, didn't retreat, and her steady gaze cut through his panic. He hummed a trembling note, the melody his mother taught him, and Siren's ears flicked, her body leaning toward the cry. Logic begged him to flee, but her quiet courage tipped the scale. He took a step forward, heart pounding, choosing her over fear. Mateo waded into the flood, the water gripping his thighs like a cold fist. Siren moved beside him, her paws slicing through the murk, her focus locked on the half-submerged house. The cry grew louder, a child's voice, trapped behind a warped door. Mateo's hands trembled as he pushed against it, splinters catching his palms, the ukulele banging against his back. Siren pressed her nose to the frame, whining, urging him on. The door gave way with a groan, revealing a girl, no older than him, clinging to a staircase. Mateo grabbed her arm, his voice hoarse, as he hummed, to keep Siren steady. Together, they pulled her free, stumbling back to higher ground, their breaths ragged but alive. The rescue was messy, but it was real. On a dry porch, Mateo collapsed, his clothes heavy with water. Siren settled beside him, her fur dripping, her breath slower now. The rescued girl was safe with others, but Mateo's chest still ached, the weight of the flood lingering. He hummed softly, the melody weaving through the evening's quiet, and Siren's head tilted, her amber eyes softening. She inched closer, her flank brushing his knee, the first sign of trust. The air smelled of rain and redemption, and Mateo's voice steadied, each note a thread tying them together. He reached out, his fingers hovering over her scarred muzzle, not touching, but offering. "We'll keep going," he whispered, the words a vow to her, to himself, as the stars began to pierce the storm's fading veil. In the dim shelter of the abandoned shop, Siren claimed a corner, her body curled tight against the cracked tiles. Her amber eyes tracked Mateo as he moved, setting down a tin of beans and a bowl of water. Her ears flattened at a distant shout from the relief camp, her growl low, barely audible. Mateo kept his distance, sitting cross-legged by the door, the ukulele resting in his lap like a shield. He didn't speak, didn't push, his silence a mirror to her caution. The air hung heavy with mildew and unspoken grief. The world outside a chaos of voices and ruin. Siren's gaze flickered to the water bowl, then back to him, wary but watchful, as if measuring the space between safety and surrender. Mateo noticed the gash on Siren's paw, crusted with mud, oozing faintly. He knelt a few feet away, a damp cloth in hand, humming the melody that seemed to calm her. Siren stiffened, her eyes narrowing, but she didn't pull back as he edged closer. The cloth touched her paw, gentle as a whisper, and she flinched, a tremor running through her. Mateo paused, his own hands shaking, remembering his mother's touch on his fevered forehead. He offered a piece of bread from his pocket, and Siren sniffed it, then ate, her muzzle brushing his fingers. In the flickering candlelight, their scars, his grief, her wounds, felt less like burdens. They sat, sharing silence and crumbs, the melody weaving a fragile bridge between them. A broken radio in the shelter crackled to life, spitting static and a faint, familiar melody, the same lilting tune Mateo's mother once sang. Siren's head snapped up, her ears rigid, her body shifting to an alert stance, as if the notes called her back to a life before the storm. Mateo froze, his fingers tightening on the ukulele, the memory of his parents' voices flooding him like a tide. The melody was Siren's signal, he realized, the one her handler used to guide her through rubble and ruin. He reached out, his hand hovering near her scarred flank, and she didn't recoil, her eyes locked on his. For a moment, they shared the song's echo, a thread of recognition stitching their pasts together. Fragile, but unbroken, sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling gold across the wrecked town. Mateo tossed a stick along a cleared patch of beach, his voice rising in a soft, playful hum. Siren hesitated, then bounded after it, her tail giving a tentative wag, her paws kicking up sand. Mateo laughed, the sound startling him, bright and unguarded, like a note he'd forgotten he could sing. Siren dropped the stick at his feet, her eyes brighter, less shadowed. They chased and tumbled, the shelter's damp walls forgotten, the air warming with their shared breath. When Mateo sat, panting, Siren flopped beside him, her flank grazing his leg. The melody lingered in his hum, and the world felt less heavy, as if the storm had left room for light. Night settled over the shelter, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and candle wax. Mateo sat on the floor, his ukulele cradled in his arms, humming the melody that tethered him to Siren. His voice wavered, tears brimming, as memories of his parents flickered like shadows on the wall. Siren, who had kept her distance, stirred from her corner. Her paws patted softly across the tiles, hesitant but deliberate, until she reached him. She lowered her head, resting it on his knee, her warm breath steady against his trembling hands. Mateo's song faltered, a sob breaking through, and Siren pressed closer, her scarred muzzle grazing his fingers. In that quiet surrender, their bond sealed, the melody weaving their grief into something whole, a fragile promise of family reborn. Siren's growl rumbled low, her body tensing as she stared into the dusk beyond the shelter's broken window. Mateo followed her gaze, his heart quickening. Voices drifted from the flooded street, sharp, official, carried by the crackle of radios. Siren's ears pinned back, her hackles rising, her amber eyes scanning the shadows where figures moved, their flashlights slicing through the gloom. The air felt heavier, charged with a threat Mateo couldn't name. Siren's nose twitched, catching a scent that made her paws shift restlessly. She knew something he didn't, her instincts keener than the storm's fading echo. Mateo's fingers tightened on the ukulele, the melody silent now, as he sensed the past creeping closer, ready to claim what they'd built. The shelter door creaked open, and a man in a rescue uniform stepped in, his flashlight cutting through the dimness. Siren's growl deepened, her body low, eyes locked on him. The man froze, his hand hovering near his radio, and said, "That's Elena's dog." Mateo's stomach twisted. Elena, Siren's handler, lost to the storm. The man's voice softened, but his words carried a blade. "She's trained, valuable. We need her back." Siren bared her teeth, her bark sharp, protective, as if the name Elena ripped open an old wound. Mateo's mind flashed to Siren tied to the mailbox, waiting for a handler who never returned. His hands shook, clutching the ukulele, as panic surged. She was his now, not theirs. But the man's eyes held no compromise. The official pulled a worn tag from his pocket, Siren's old ID glinting in the candlelight. "She's agency property," he said, voice firm, stepping closer. Siren snarled, planting herself between Mateo and the man, her hackles a jagged line. Mateo's heart pounded, the air thick with the storm's lingering weight. He hummed the melody, soft and desperate, and Siren's ears flicked, her growl softening but not fading. "She's mine," Mateo whispered, voice cracking, stepping forward to clutch her collar. The official's gaze hardened, citing regulations, but Mateo sang louder, the tune weaving through the tension. Siren leaned into him, her body a shield. The standoff stretched, taut as a wire, until the man's radio crackled, pulling his attention. Mateo's song held, a defiant claim to their bond. The official's footsteps faded, his radio's crackle swallowed by the night. Mateo sank to the floor, his breath uneven, the ukulele pressed against his chest. Siren settled beside him, her flank warm against his side, her amber eyes scanning the dark as if the threat might return. The shelter's air was heavy, scented with damp wood and fear, but her steady breathing grounded him. He hummed softly, the melody a fragile thread weaving through their shared silence. Siren's head rested on his knee, a quiet promise in the weight of her touch. The storm's echo lingered, but so did their bond, forged in defiance. Mateo's fingers traced her scarred muzzle, and he whispered, "We're safe now," sealing a vow to protect what they'd found. Siren's ears pricked, her body tensing as footsteps crunched outside the shelter. Mateo's pulse quickened, the ukulele slipping from his lap. Through the cracked window, flashlight beams danced, and voices, clipped, official, cut through the dusk. Siren's low growl vibrated, her hackles rising as two figures approached, one holding a leash that glinted in the dim light. "That's her," one said, their tone resolute. Mateo's stomach churned. They'd come for Siren again, their claim backed by authority. He grabbed her collar, pulling her into a shadowed corner of a nearby wrecked house, its walls sagging like a wounded beast. Siren's eyes locked on the door, her instincts sharp, signaling danger. The air tightened, the storm's ghost stirring, as Mateo whispered her melody, bracing for the fight. The wrecked house groaned under the weight of its own ruin, its splintered beams casting jagged shadows. Mateo pressed against a sagging wall, Siren's fur bristling as she stood guard, her growl a low thunder. The officials' boots thudded closer, their flashlights slicing through the gloom, pinning Mateo and Siren in their glare. "She's trained for this work, kid," one said, holding up the leash like a noose. "You can't keep her." Siren's teeth flashed, her body shielding Mateo, her loyalty fierce against the threat. Mateo's heart hammered, the flood's memory clawing at him, losing his parents, now losing her. The air was thick, suffocating, the moment teetering on the edge of loss. He clutched her collar, his voice a whisper, "You're mine," as the officials stepped closer, unyielding. Mateo's voice broke free, a trembling hum of the melody that bound him to Siren. The notes rose, shaky but defiant, filling the broken house with their fragile strength. Siren's growl softened, her eyes flicking to him, steadying under the song's familiar pull. "She's my family," Mateo said, his voice cracking, stepping forward to face the officials. "She saved people with me. She chose me." Tears streaked his face, but he sang louder, the tune Elena once used now his own. Siren pressed against his leg, her warmth a shield. One official hesitated, his eyes softening, moved by the boy's raw plea. "Keep her safe," he muttered, lowering the leash. The tension broke, the melody lingering like a promise kept, as Mateo and Siren stood, unbroken, together. The relief camp hummed with soft voices and the clink of tin cups, a fragile pulse of survival. Mateo sat on a cot, Siren curled at his feet, her fur still damp from the storm's remnants. He dabbed a cloth at a fresh cut on her flank, his movements slow, deliberate, as if stitching their bond tighter. The air smelled of antiseptic and hope, but grief lingered in the quiet spaces, his parents' absence a shadow that never left. Siren's breath was steady, her amber eyes half closed, trusting. Mateo's fingers paused, his hum barely audible, a melody that carried them through. The camp's lantern light flickered, casting their silhouettes as one, a moment of stillness where survival felt like enough, even with the ache. Days passed, and Mateo's voice grew stronger, his songs weaving through the camp as he and Siren moved among the survivors. He sang while sorting supplies, Siren trailing close, her tail wagging softly, her eyes brighter with each note. They helped where they could, carrying blankets, guiding lost children, their presence a quiet anchor. When Mateo strummed the ukulele, Siren would lie beside him, her head tilted as if listening for Elena's echo in his melody. Their wounds, his grief and her scars, healed in small gestures. Her nudge against his hand, his smile when she followed. The camp's chaos softened around them, their bond a steady rhythm, a harmony born from shared survival, growing louder with each step forward. The beach stretched wide, cleared of debris, the ocean's roar now a gentle hum under a pale dawn. Mateo walked with his ukulele, strumming the melody that had saved them, each note a pulse of trust. Siren bounded ahead, her paws kicking up sand, then circled back, her amber eyes bright, free of shadows. She dropped at his feet, her head resting against his leg, her tail sweeping the ground. Mateo knelt, his fingers grazing her scarred muzzle, the song fading into a soft smile. The storm's echo lingered in the distance, a faint reminder of loss, but their bond was louder, a quiet rebirth carried in the melody. They stood together, boy and dog, the horizon open, their steps a shared promise of home.